Right, there's my drill. Whilst I've got the body at this point, before I've done any final shaping, I'm going to take a force and a bit in my drill, and I'm just going to level a couple of areas around these holes that I've done for the controls, just so I've got a flatter, more comfortable surface for the knobs to sit in. Obviously I don't want to go too deep because the top of this is quite thin, but I should have left myself enough to just put in a nice little round dip. The knobs are going to be kind of angled with the actual top, so I don't have to worry about getting it perfectly flat and level. I use a smaller drill bit for where the switch is going to go, and then I'll just blend in the transitions. So, using a spare knob that I've got kicking about, that I use mostly for measurements, the angles here, with, say, your hand kind of just behind the bridge, the tone at that angle feels incredibly comfortable, and the volume there, again, you're just following the curve of the carve around, and it seems to sit really nicely. I need some cavities in this body. I'm going to start with the tremolo cavity, which needs to be placed pretty accurately. I've got the neck here, so I can double check some measurements. Essentially, the neck is going to join on at the 21st fret in this for this lower horn, because obviously my heel join on the body is angled. So it'll be the 21st for the lower horn, and it'll work out just before the 19th, sorry, just after the 19th for the upper horn. The measurements there, so if I'm doing a 25.5 inch scale length, which means that half of that, so 12 3/4 of an inch, yeah, from the 12th is where my bridge needs to be. The pickup I've got marked on here is going to sit against the end of the fretboard. So what I can do is measure to the end of my fretboard, and then I know exactly where I stand there. I've got my lines already drawn on here, so I can line this up with that line, following my centre line, and then we transfer that along to 12 3/4, which is there, which is actually almost exactly where I'd roughly measured it before I put in the angle and things, so that's not too bad. The tremolo cavity is built into my Strat type template, so what I'm going to do is line this up, get it in the right place, masking tape and super glue it down, and then I'm just going to start routing out through this cavity. So it'll eventually meet up with the space that I've already got routed from the back. The top is at its thickest here, so I may well need to use a different bit and route inside it to just extend the space a little bit, but I'll know that when I get to once I get through it. So let's get it stuck down. And there we have a hole all the way through. There's still a little bit of tidying up around the edges to do, possibly widening the cavity inside to give the trem block a bit of extra movement. But I think we're looking pretty good there. Yeah. So what I've already done is mark out the centre of the binding, both within the frets, the width of the fret itself that I need to mark, and the depth of the binding. So I've used my centre finding ruler that I was very kindly bought for my birthday, and I've just measured along, and I've got a little mark all the way on the 3rd, 5th, 7th, 9th, so on and so forth. The 12th and the 24th, because they're octaves, are doubles, so I've got 2 dots on those which I've spaced out. So I've already marked most of them with the bradawl, just so that the drill bit has got something to bite into rather than just spinning wildly and drilling a hole wherever the hell it feels like. I'm just going to make sure that they're all in, and then I'm going to drill some holes. What I'm going to do now is put the tubing in with some super glue, cut it off, and then move on to the next one. Keep doing that. Once they're all in, I shall file them flush, and then we'll see about the middle dots in them. If you haven't already, you should definitely check out the other guys doing the use what you've got challenge. Then, I mean, obviously, I'm not as far along as I'd like to be. Some of them have already finished, and there's some bloody great guitars out there. So have a look at their channels. They should be linked below, and subscribe to them. Watch more. They've all got great videos. They all build some fantastic things. Well, we've got side dots in now. I've filed them all flush and they're nice and tidy. The mother of pearl inside the aluminium tubing looks great. What I need to do now is pull the neck to one side and get some more work done on the body. Obviously I've got the top attached now, I'm not going to have any binding on this guitar, which means that I've got the raw edge of the top showing. Now the glue joint is nice and clean and straight, there's no gaps, but the back kind of looks a little bit off to my eyes. So what I've decided I'm going to do is I'm going to create essentially some faux binding with little purfling strips. To do that, I've made myself, with 2 scalpel blades and an offcut of maple, a little kind of it's a purfling cutter. You can buy them, and I probably will do in the future, but I wanted to see whether I could do it just with a quick and dirty homemade tool, and it works. I've given it a test on a piece of wood somewhere else before I started on this, and then I've started just cutting around the edge here. So I've got a stop block that sits against the top and gives me my depth, and the blades are fixed in place, and I literally drag it around the edge using the straight side to keep the tool level, and it will cut through the wood right on the join. So I'm doing this on the top and the back, and then I've modified this little knife here because none of my chisels, even my tiniest inlay chisel, was narrow enough. Once I've scraped the middle of these 2 little cuts out, that leaves me a slot running all the way around, which I'm then going to fill with this 0.5mm thick sterling silver wire. It's a square wire, which I like to use for inlays because I don't have to file it flat, I don't have to fill the edges and lose the crisp edge of it. It'll sit nicely in the little groove I've got here. Hang on, there we go. A few bits will need tapping in with a hammer, but that's perfect, and it's basically creates a very subtle but really nice effect. So you get a little bit of sparkle, and as I say, I'll do that from the back as well, and that will create like a faux binding. I may even stain this edge just for contrast and leave the natural faux binding effect, but we'll see when we get to it. So I've done some rough measuring, and each go round the body of the guitar is roughly 1.5 meters, give or take, which is quite a lot. So I've actually got 5 meters of the stuff here, and once I've done the sides, I might see if I've got enough left to do something on the top, just to pick out a bit of extra detail. So I'm going to get on with this, and it might take quite a while. Another good tool for this, especially in this area here where I've got a much deeper carve, and I can't use the same depth on the purfling cutter, is my little fret slot cleaning saw. It's roughly the same thickness, so as long as I follow the line, which I can mark out with a scalpel, it just cleans out the waste quite nicely. I've inlaid the silver into the sides, and then I started on the top before I realised that my camera had run out of memory. So to do the top, so far I've only done one side. I've modified my homemade purfling cutter. I've rounded off and chamfered this end because I'm cutting from the other side, and I've put a nail in a lot closer to the blades. I've also rounded this off with a file so it's not going to dig in and scratch anywhere. So I'm running up against the outside edge to cut the groove right near the outside. So I've probably got about 2mm when I'm finished, which will create the binding effect. This area here, I didn't want to just come straight round because then I'd have a strange kind of empty triangle. So I'm bringing the silver up into a little whatever shape that is, it kind of crosses over and ends up here. I'm also ending in the around the tip of the horns, just because I quite like the effect it has. So I'm going to carry on with this one now and get this side finished. So essentially I'm just very gently scoring it to start with, and then gradually making the cuts a bit deeper and working slightly further back each time. So to do this squiggle, that's probably a technical term, to do this little squiggle at this end, I have to freehand it with the scalpel, which is why I want a very sharp scalpel. So I'm going to do that, and I'm going to be very careful. So I need to score one line on either side of where I want to inlay the silver. So I need to keep them very close together, and again we'll start gently marking it and then just take it a bit deeper, slowly, a little bit at a time. I need to cut the silver, or start inlaying the silver. First thing I need to do really is file the end of this piece to match up with the tight point that I've got on here. Once I've got the silver lined up, and then I'll drop fill it with some super glue, and I'll use the rounded end of my lump of brass here to actually burnish it in, to just make sure that it sets as flat as possible. Some parts might be quite tight and require tapping in with a hammer. And essentially we just work our way around with a hammer, the burnishing tool, and some super glue, and keep on going until it's all stuck in place. And I'm not sure how, or the science behind it. It's probably something to do with the heat built up through friction, but when you're burnishing it with the copper, the brass rod there, it actually sets a bit quicker whilst you're holding it whilst you're rubbing it in place, which is quite nice. And then obviously you can see we've got a little bit of excess super glue here. We'll go back afterwards with a scraper and clean that up.